The nausea hit Thyra during the dawn hunt, sudden and violent enough to send her stumbling behind a massive oak tree. She pressed her palm against the rough bark, breathing through her mouth as the world tilted sideways. Around her, the rest of the Silver Creek pack continued their pursuit of the elk herd, their howls fading into the distance. This was the third morning in a row. Thyra wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, her wolf instincts already whispering the truth she didn't want to acknowledge. The Blood Moon Festival had been 6 weeks ago, that wild, primal night when the full moon turned crimson and ancient magic loosened the careful control all werewolves maintained. She'd shifted and run with a stranger, a massive wolf whose scent had called to something deep in her soul. They'd mated in the forest, savage and perfect. And when dawn came, he'd vanished like smoke. She told herself it meant nothing, a festival encounter, nothing more. But her body knew differently. Thyra? The voice made her stiffen. Marcus, one of the pack's hunters, emerged from between two birch trees. His nostrils flared as he scented the air, and she watched his expression shift from concern to something harder. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. Werewolf senses didn't lie, and now that he'd noticed, she couldn't hide it. The subtle change in her scent would be obvious to any wolf paying attention. "It's none of your concern," Thyra said, straightening despite the lingering nausea. She was a strong wolf, a capable hunter, and she wouldn't show weakness. Not now. "None of my concern?" Marcus's voice rose. "You coupled with a stranger during the blood moon. That's pack business, Thyra. Especially now." The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. The Silver Creek pack had strict rules about bloodlines, about outsiders. Her father had been a strong beta, but he'd died 2 years ago defending their territory. Her mother had followed him into death from grief within months. Thyra had no powerful family left to protect her from the pack's judgment. "I'll speak to Elder Senna," Thyra said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Tomorrow, after I've—" "You'll speak to her now." Marcus's hand closed around her upper arm, his grip just shy of painful. "The Elder has been waiting for you. She knew before you did, Thyra. She dreamed it." Cold fear slithered down Thyra's spine. Elder Senna's prophetic dreams were legendary, and they were never wrong. If the Elder had dreamed about her pregnancy, it meant something significant. And in Thyra's experience, significant rarely meant good. Marcus dragged her back toward the pack's central territory, his fingers pressing into her flesh with each step. Thyra could have fought him. Her wolf snarled inside her, demanding she defend herself and the fragile life now growing in her womb. But fighting would only make things worse. She needed to understand what was happening before she made any moves. The pack's meeting hall was a massive structure built from ancient timber and stone, designed to withstand both weather and warfare. When Marcus hauled her through the entrance, Thyra's heart sank. The entire pack leadership was already assembled. The current Alpha, Ronin, his Luna, the Betas, and Elder Senna herself seated in the position of honor beside the ceremonial fire. Elder Senna's white hair fell past her shoulders like moonlight, and her clouded eyes somehow saw more than any other wolf in the pack. She raised one gnarled hand, and Marcus immediately released Thyra. "Come here, child," the elder said, her voice like wind through dry leaves. Thyra approached on trembling legs. The assembled pack members watched her with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. Alpha Ronin's face was carved from granite, revealing nothing. Elder Senna reached out and placed both palms on Thyra's still flat stomach. The old woman's eyes rolled back in her head, and when she spoke again, her voice resonated with power that made the air itself vibrate. "The child of two bloodlines, the daughter of prophecy. She will hold the power to unite all werewolf kingdoms under one banner, or she will burn them all to ash and leave nothing but ruin." Silence crashed through the hall like a physical force. Thyra's mouth went dry. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Alpha Ronan spoke for the first time, his voice heavy with regret. That you carry a child who could destroy everything our kind has built. The old prophecies spoke of such a birth, a child conceived under the blood moon, carrying mixed royal bloodlines, who would reshape our world. He paused, his jaw working. Your mate, whoever he was, must have been from one of the royal lines. Combined with your father's beta bloodline, it's created something that should never have existed. Then we train her, Thyra said desperately, her hand moving protectively to her stomach. We prepare my daughter to choose unity instead of destruction. We can't risk it. Lunavera's voice was sharp as broken glass. I have 3 children, Thyra. Your father was a good man, and I'm sorry for what we must do, but I won't gamble my children's lives on the hope that yours chooses peace. The pack members began to murmur, their voices building like distant thunder. Thyra caught fragments of their words. Too dangerous. Can't allow it. Kill them both before it's born. No. The word tore from her throat. You can't. She's innocent. She hasn't done anything. Neither had the last prophesied child, Elder Senna said quietly. 300 years ago, such a child was born. Her parents raised her with love, taught her control, believed she would choose wisely. The elder's voice dropped to a whisper. She burned 17 packs to nothing but bones and ash before she was finally killed. Thousands died. Entire bloodlines ended. Thyra backed toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. I won't let you kill my baby. You have no choice. Alpha Ronan stood, and the weight of his power filled the hall. The pack has already voted while you were being retrieved. The decision is unanimous, Thyra. I'm sorry, but you and the child must die before she's born. It will be quick and painless. You have my word. Something inside Thyra snapped. The careful control she'd maintained since entering the hall shattered like glass, and her wolf surged forward with a desperate mother's fury. She shifted mid-step, her clothes tearing away as fur rippled across her skin. Several pack members lunged for her, but Thyra was already moving. She was smaller than the warriors, but fear and maternal instinct made her fast. She dodged Marcus's grab, ducked under another beta's reaching arms, and crashed through the hall's window in an explosion of wood and glass. Pain lanced through her shoulder where the broken frame caught her flesh, but Thyra didn't stop. She hit the ground running, blood matting her silver fur as she sprinted for the tree line. Behind her, the howls began. They were hunting her. Her own pack, her family, the wolves she'd grown up with. They were hunting her like prey. Thyra ran deeper into the forest, her wounded shoulder screaming with each stride. She could hear them behind her, at least a dozen wolves, their paws thundering against the earth. They were faster than her, stronger than her, and they knew these woods as well as she did. But she had something they didn't. The absolute certainty that she would die before she let them take her child. She veered left, toward the river, hoping the water would mask her scent. Her lungs burned and her vision blurred from blood loss, but she pushed harder. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and Thyra burst from the undergrowth onto the rocky riverbank. A massive gray wolf cut off her path. Thyra skidded to a halt, her claws scrabbling on wet stone. The gray wolf, Kieran, one of the pack's best trackers, bared his teeth. Behind her, she could hear the others closing in. She had seconds to decide. Thyra looked at the river. The current was brutal this time of year, swollen with mountain snowmelt. It would either carry her to safety or drown her. She jumped. The icy water hit like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. The current grabbed her immediately, dragging her downstream with terrifying speed. Thyra shifted back to human form, knowing she'd have better luck controlling her direction with hands instead of paws. Her wounded shoulder burned as she fought to keep her head above water. Behind her, she heard the frustrated howls of the pack. They wouldn't follow into this current. It was too dangerous, too wild. The river carried her for what felt like hours. Thyra's strength faded with each passing moment, her body growing numb from cold and blood loss. She tried to grab onto rocks, fallen logs, anything, but her fingers were too weak. Finally, the current pushed her toward a shallow section near the bank. Thyra dragged herself onto the muddy shore, her naked body covered in cuts and bruises. She lay there gasping, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Please, she thought, please still be alive. She didn't know if she was praying to the child or to whatever gods might be listening. When Thera finally managed to stand, she realized she had no idea where she was. The forest around her was unfamiliar, the trees taller and more ancient than those in Silver Creek territory. She'd traveled far, but not far enough. The pack would track her once daylight came, and they could follow the river's path. She needed to keep moving. Thyra stumbled forward, her bare feet leaving bloody prints on the forest floor. She'd lost everything: her pack, her home, her future. All she had left was the tiny life growing inside her and the determination to protect it. The sun was setting when she finally collapsed. She'd tried to keep going, but her body simply stopped responding. Thera crumpled onto a bed of fallen leaves, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, feel the warmth draining from her limbs. This was how she would die, alone in a strange forest, having failed before she'd even truly begun to fight. Please, she whispered to her unborn daughter. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Then the darkness took her, and Thyra knew nothing more. The scent hit Wolf like a physical blow. Honey and wildflowers and something achingly familiar that made his wolf howl inside his chest. He stood at the northern border of his territory, where he'd been inspecting the patrol routes, and suddenly, nothing else mattered except following that scent. Sire. His beta, Garrett, looked at him with confusion. What is it? Wolf didn't answer. He was already moving, his powerful legs eating up the distance as he tracked the scent to its source. His heart pounded with an urgency he didn't understand, a primal need that overrode every other thought. He found her in a small clearing, naked and bloody and so still that for one terrible moment he thought he was too late. Then her chest moved with a shallow breath, and Wolf's entire world narrowed to the fragile woman lying broken at his feet. Mine. The word resonated through every fiber of his being. This wasn't just attraction or desire. This was recognition on a soul-deep level, the kind that happened only once in a werewolf's lifetime. She was his mate. Wolf dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her body as he assessed her injuries. Deep gash on her shoulder, probably from glass or wood. Bruises and cuts covering her skin. Hypothermia setting in from prolonged exposure. And underneath it all, barely detectable, she was pregnant. Wolf's world tilted sideways as memories crashed through him. The Blood Moon Festival 6 weeks ago, when he'd attended in wolf form to avoid the political theater his presence always caused. The silver she-wolf who'd caught his attention, whose scent had driven him wild with need. They'd made it in a frenzy of instinct and desire, and he'd left before dawn because he was the Alpha King and couldn't afford the complication of a festival encounter. Except it hadn't been just an encounter. She was his true mate, and she carried his child. Garrett! Wolf's voice came out as a command that made the trees themselves seem to bend. Get the healer, now, and bring blankets, clothes, medical supplies. His beta disappeared without question, knowing better than to hesitate when Wolf used that tone. Wolf carefully gathered the unconscious woman into his arms, cradling her against his chest. Her skin was ice cold, her heartbeat far too weak. The gash on her shoulder was still bleeding sluggishly, and he could see other wounds hidden beneath the dirt and blood covering her body. Someone had hurt her. Someone had driven his mate to flee so desperately that she'd nearly killed herself in the process. Rage burned through Wolf's chest, cold and absolutely lethal. When he found whoever was responsible, he would make them regret every breath they'd ever taken. But first, he had to save her. Wolf pressed his hand against her wounded shoulder, using his own body heat to warm her. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice dropping to something gentler than he'd used in years. "I've got you now. You're safe." Her eyelids fluttered. For just a moment she looked at him. Really looked at him. And Wolf felt the mate bond snap into place like a key turning in a lock. Recognition flared in her eyes, confusion and hope and fear all tangled together. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Me," Wolf confirmed, "and I'm never letting you go." Then her eyes closed again, and Wolf's heart clenched with fear. Garrett returned with 3 other pack members, all carrying supplies. Wolf's sister Mira was with them, her healer's bag already open. "Brother," Mira breathed when she saw the woman in his arms. "What happened?" "I don't know yet," Wolf said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "But someone tried to kill her. Someone drove her onto my territory half dead." He looked down at his mate's face, memorizing every delicate feature. "She's mine, Mira. My true mate. And she's carrying my heir." The assembled wolves went utterly still. In 500 years of ruling, Wolf had never taken a mate. His people had begun to believe he never would, that he was too powerful, too cold, too consumed by his throne to submit to the vulnerability a mate bond required. "Then we'll save her," Mira said firmly. She knelt beside them, her hands already moving over the woman's injuries with practiced efficiency. "The gash needs stitching, and she's severely dehydrated. The pregnancy—" She paused, her expression troubled. "It's there, but weak. We need to get her warm and stable immediately." "The castle," Wolf decided. "My private quarters. No one else gets access." He stood with his mate still cradled against his chest, ignoring how her blood soaked into his clothes. The walk back to his fortress was the longest of his life. Every shallow breath she took felt like a small miracle. Every moment her heart continued beating was a gift. His castle rose from the mountainside like something carved from the stone itself, all sharp angles and defensive positions, built to withstand any siege. His pack members stopped and stared as he strode through the gates with an unconscious, naked woman in his arms, but Wolf's expression must have warned them against questions. They parted before him like water, bowing their heads in submission. Wolf's private quarters occupied the entire top floor of the main tower. He kicked open the door to his bedroom, a massive space dominated by a bed large enough for his shifted form, and gently laid his mate on the soft furs. Mira worked quickly, cleaning and stitching the shoulder wound while Garrett built up the fire until the room blazed with heat. Wolf hovered beside the bed, his hands clenched into fists as he watched his sister work. "She'll live," Mira said finally, wrapping clean bandages around the stitched wound. "The baby, too, as long as she gets proper rest and nutrition." "But Wolf—" She looked up at him, concern written across her face. "Those injuries weren't from an animal attack or an accident. Someone used claws on her deliberately, and she ran so far and so desperately that she would have died rather than stop." "I know." Wolf's voice was absolutely flat, the kind of calm that preceded massive violence. "When she wakes, I'll find out who did this, and then I'll destroy them." Mira nodded, knowing better than to counsel mercy when it came to threats against Wolf's mate. She finished her work and stood. "I'll have food and water brought up. She'll need both when she wakes." She paused at the door. "You should get cleaned up, brother. You'll scare her if she wakes to find you covered in her blood." Wolf looked down at himself and realized Mira was right. His clothes were soaked crimson, and he probably looked like a nightmare. But leaving his mate's side felt impossible, as if some invisible cord tied him to her. "I'll be quick," he muttered. He stripped off his ruined clothes and cleaned himself with water from the basin near the window, never taking his eyes off the woman in his bed for more than a few seconds. She looked impossibly small beneath his furs, her silver hair spread across his pillows like moonlight. Beautiful. Fragile. His. Wolf pulled on clean clothes and returned to the bedside, settling into the chair Garrett had dragged over. He reached out and carefully took her hand, her fingers delicate compared to his scarred warrior's palm. "I don't even know your name," he said quietly, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist. "But I know you're mine, and I know someone tried to take you from me before we even had a chance." His grip tightened fractionally. "That was their last mistake. When you wake, you'll tell me everything, and then I'll show them what happens when someone threatens the Alpha King's mate." Her hand twitched in his, and Wolf's heart leaped. He leaned closer, watching as her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes were the color of amber, golden brown with flecks of green, and they focused on him with startling clarity. "You're real," she whispered. "I thought I dreamed you." "I'm real." Wolf raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "And you're safe now. I swear it on my life and crown. No one will hurt you again." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "They tried to kill my baby. My own pack. They said she would destroy everything, so they voted to execute us both." White-hot rage exploded through Wolf's chest, her own pack. They'd tried to murder their own member, a pregnant woman, because of fear. "What's your name?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain gentle despite the fury churning inside him. "Thyra." Her hand gripped his like a lifeline. "I'm nobody. Just an orphaned pack member with no rank, no power. But my baby is mine." Wolf said it with absolute certainty, watching her eyes widen. "The Blood Moon Festival. You were the silver wolf I mated with that night." Thyra stared at him, and he watched understanding dawn across her face. "You're? Who are you?" "Wolf," he said simply. "Alpha King of all packs, ruler of the territories, and your true mate." He leaned closer, letting her see the truth in his eyes. "That child you're protecting so fiercely? She's my daughter, my heir, and I will burn down every pack that dares threaten her, starting with yours." Thyra woke to silk sheets and morning light filtered through stained glass windows that painted the stone walls in jeweled colors. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot the betrayal, the desperate flight, the river that had nearly claimed her life. Then the tenderness in her shoulder reminded her of everything, and her hand flew instinctively to her stomach. Still there. Still alive. She exhaled shakily and let her gaze wander across the enormous room. Wolf's private quarters were nothing like the simple wooden structures of her former pack. This was a space built for royalty, all dark wood and rich fabrics, with tapestries depicting ancient battles hanging between weapon displays. The bed alone could have fit 5 wolves in shifted form, and the fireplace across from it was tall enough for her to stand inside. Isolating, she thought. Beautiful, but isolating. The door opened, and Mira entered carrying a tray laden with food. Wolf's sister moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in this castle, her dark hair braided in an intricate pattern that must have taken an hour to create. "You're awake," Mira said, her voice warmer than Thyra expected. "That's good. You've been sleeping for almost 2 full days." 2 days? Thyra tried to sit up and gasped as pain lanced through her shoulder. "Easy." Mira set the tray on a side table and moved to help, adjusting pillows behind Thyra's back. "Your body needs time to heal. You lost a lot of blood, and the hypothermia nearly killed you." Her hands were gentle as she checked the bandages. "But the baby is strong. I can hear the heartbeat clearly now that you're recovering." Tears pricked Thyra's eyes. "Thank you for saving us." "Thank my brother." Mira's expression softened. "I've never seen him like that. So desperate, so afraid. in 500 years. Wolf has never brought a woman to his personal quarters. He's never claimed a mate. And then suddenly you're here, and he's threatening to execute anyone who enters without his permission. She paused, studying Thera with intelligent eyes. You must be someone very special. Thyra thought about Wolf's words before she'd fallen back asleep. That child you're protecting so fiercely, she's my daughter, my heir, and I will burn down every pack that threatens her. He says the baby is his, Thyra said quietly, from the Blood Moon Festival. I know, he told me. Mira poured water from a pitcher into a silver cup and handed it to Thera. Drink. You need to stay hydrated. She waited until Thyra had taken several sips before continuing. My brother doesn't make claims lightly. If he says the child is his, then he's certain. And if he's claimed you as his mate? Mira's voice dropped. Thyra, do you understand what that means? What kind of danger you're in now? The water suddenly tasted like ash in Thyra's mouth. My old pack already wants me dead. How much worse can it get? Much worse. Mira settled into the chair beside the bed, her expression grave. Wolf rules all packs with absolute authority. There are alphas who resent his power, who've been waiting for any sign of weakness to exploit. For centuries, they couldn't touch him because he had no mate, no family, no vulnerability. Now you exist, and you're carrying his heir. She leaned forward. They'll come for you, Thyra. Not just your old pack, but every wolf who wants to see my brother fall. The food on the tray looked delicious. Roasted meat, fresh bread, berries and cream. But Thyra's appetite had vanished. Maybe I should leave. Find somewhere far away where he'd tear apart the world to find you. Mira's voice was matter of fact. And he'd be weaker for your absence. No, the safest place for you is here, under his protection. But you need to understand what you're walking into. The court whispers are already starting. As if summoned by Mira's words, voices drifted through the partially open door, servants in the hallway speaking in hushed tones. Pregnant with the king's child, they say. Nobody, just some pack refugee. Why would he claim her? She has no bloodline, no power. Thyra's cheeks burned. She'd never been important in her old pack. Just another mid-ranking wolf with decent hunting skills and dead parents. The idea that she was now the subject of royal gossip made her skin crawl. Ignore them, Mira said firmly. They're jealous and stupid. You're the Alpha King's true mate. That makes you their queen, whether they like it or not. She stood and moved to close the door fully, cutting off the whispers. Now eat. You need your strength. Thyra managed to force down some food, though every bite felt like a stone in her stomach. Mira stayed with her, making light conversation about the castle layout and the pack dynamics, carefully avoiding any mention of the threats gathering beyond these walls. When Mira finally left, Thyra was alone with her thoughts. She should feel safe here. Wolf had promised his protection, and from everything Mira said, he had the power to enforce that promise. But safety felt like a luxury Thera couldn't afford to believe in. Her own pack had tried to kill her. The father of her child was a king she barely knew. And somewhere out there, enemies were gathering. The door opened again as the sun reached its zenith, and this time it was Wolf himself who entered. Thyra's breath caught. In the chaos of her rescue and recovery, she hadn't really looked at him. Not the way she was looking now. He was massive even in human form, easily 6.5 feet of pure muscle wrapped in dark leather and midnight fabric. His black hair fell past his shoulders, and his eyes were the silver blue of winter ice. Scars marked his forearms and neck, the kind earned in real combat, not ritual challenges. He looked like violence personified, a predator wearing a man's skin, and her body responded to him with a hunger that terrified her. You're awake, Wolf said, his deep voice rolling through the room like distant thunder. Good. We need to talk. He moved a chair closer to the bed with one hand, the heavy furniture sliding across the stone floor as if it weighed nothing. When he sat, his presence seemed to fill the entire space, making the enormous room feel suddenly intimate. How do you feel? He asked. Alive, Thyra managed. Thanks to you. The baby? Strong. Your sister says she can hear the heartbeat. Something flickered in Wolf's eyes. Relief, pride, possessiveness all tangled together. Good. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Thyra, I need you to tell me everything. Your pack, the prophecy, why they tried to kill you. All of it. So she did. The words spilled out like poison she'd been holding inside. Elder Senna's prophetic dream. The pack's vote for execution. Her desperate flight. Wolf's expression grew progressively darker as she spoke, his hands clenching into fists that made his knuckles crack. They voted unanimously? His voice was soft, deadly. Your entire pack agreed to murder you and my child? They were afraid, Thyra said, though she didn't know why she was defending them. The prophecy said she would either unite all packs or destroy them. They didn't want to risk. I don't care what they risked. Wolf stood abruptly, his barely controlled rage making the air itself feel heavy. They tried to kill my mate. They tried to kill my heir. Fear doesn't excuse that. Nothing excuses that. He began to pace, his movements predatory and precise. Thyra watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the Alpha King, the wolf who ruled with absolute authority, who had held his throne for 5 centuries through pure dominance. Mira had warned her about his reputation, about the merciless way he dealt with traitors and threats. She should be afraid of him, but instead, she felt drawn to him like iron to a lodestone. What will you do? She asked quietly. Wolf stopped pacing and turned to face her, and the expression on his face made her shiver. I'm going to send a message to every pack in my territory. They will know that you are mine, that the child is mine, and that anyone who threatens either of you will face my personal wrath. He moved back to the bed, sitting on its edge close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. But first, I need to know if you accept this. Accept me. Thyra's mouth went dry. What do you mean? The mate bond, Wolf said, his gaze intense. You felt it when we mated during the blood moon. I know you did, because I felt it too. But I left before you woke, and you've had no choice in what's happened since. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his much larger one. I'm not a good male. Thyra, I've done terrible things to hold my throne. I have enemies who will come for you just to hurt me. My world is violence and politics and constant threats. If you want to refuse this bond, if you want me to find you somewhere safe and distant where you can raise our daughter in peace, I'll do it. I'll protect you from afar and never force my presence on you. But, Thyra whispered, because she could hear the unspoken word hanging between them. But I don't want to. Wolf's thumb traced circles on her palm, the gentle touch at odds with his fierce expression. I want you here. I want to know our daughter. I want... He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. I've been alone for a very long time. I never thought I'd find my true mate. And now that I have, the thought of letting you go feels like tearing out my own heart. Thyra stared at their joined hands, her small, scarred fingers dwarfed by his warrior's grip. She thought about the silver wolf who'd claimed her during the blood moon, whose scent had driven her wild with need. She thought about the way her body responded to Wolf's presence, the way her wolf purred contentedly when he was near, and she thought about the tiny life growing inside her, the daughter who would need both parents to navigate the dangerous world she'd be born into. I don't want to be alone either, Thyra admitted. But I'm scared. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know anything about politics or ruling. I'm just Mine, Wolf interrupted firmly. That's all you need to be. Mine, and safe, and healthy enough to carry our daughter to term. Everything else, we'll figure out together. He leaned closer, and Thyra's breath caught as his scent washed over her. Pine and snow and something uniquely male that made her wolf howl with recognition. This was her mate, not just the father of her child, but the other half of her soul. Together, she echoed, and felt the mate bond pulse between them like a living thing. Wolf's expression softened in a way that transformed his entire face. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent heat racing through her veins. Rest now. Heal. I'll have guards posted outside, and Mira will check on you regularly. You're safe here, Thera. I swear it. He left reluctantly, looking back twice before closing the door, and Thyra was alone again with her racing thoughts. Safe. The word felt foreign, impossible. But for the first time since Elder Senna's prophecy had shattered her world, Thyra allowed herself to hope. The days developed a rhythm. Thyra's body healed slowly, her shoulder knitting back together under Mira's careful attention. She spent hours in Wolf's quarters, reading from his extensive library or watching the castle grounds from the balcony that overlooked the training yards. She saw Wolf's warriors drill with brutal efficiency, saw the way pack members moved through the fortress with purpose and discipline. This was a military operation masquerading as a royal court. And every evening, as the sun set and painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Wolf came to her. He brought food and news from the outside world, carefully editing his reports, but never lying when she asked direct questions. Thyra learned that messengers had been sent to all packs announcing her status as his mate. She learned that the responses had been mixed. Loyalty from some, silence from others, and outright hostility from a few. Your former pack hasn't responded, Wolf told her one evening, his voice carefully neutral. Neither has Alpha Drogath's territory. Thyra looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. Drogath. I've heard that name. He rules the mountain territories to the east. He rules them poorly, Wolf said with barely concealed contempt. He's ambitious and reckless, always pushing boundaries to see how far he can go before I'm forced to respond. We've been headed for a confrontation for decades. He paused. I suspect he sees the situation as an opportunity. The book fell forgotten into Thyra's lap. An opportunity for what? To challenge me. Wolf moved to stand by the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dying light. A king with a pregnant mate is a king with something to lose. It makes me vulnerable in ways I haven't been before. Fear coiled in Thyra's stomach. Maybe I should... No. Wolf turned to face her, his expression fierce. Don't even suggest leaving again. You and our daughter are not weaknesses to be hidden away. You're my greatest strength. And I'll prove it to anyone stupid enough to test me. The conviction in his voice made Thyra's chest tight. She set the book aside and stood, crossing to where Wolf stood by the window. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. You're afraid, she said, surprised by the revelation. Terrified, Wolf admitted. For 500 years I've had nothing to lose but my own life, and I stopped fearing death centuries ago. Now I have you, and I have our daughter, and the thought of failing to protect you. He shook his head. It's a weakness I've never experienced before. Thyra reached out and placed her hand over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her palm. Or maybe it's a strength you've never had access to before, something worth fighting for instead of just fighting. Wolf covered her hand with his own, holding it against his chest. His eyes met hers, and Thyra saw past the Alpha King to the man beneath, lonely, battle-scarred, desperate for connection, but afraid to trust it. Stay with me tonight, Wolf said quietly. Not for mating, just stay. I sleep better when you're near. Thera should have said no. She was still healing, still processing everything that had happened, but the mate bond pulled at her. And the truth was, she slept better when he was near too. Okay, she whispered. They lay together in Wolf's massive bed, Thera tucked against his chest with his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. His hand rested on her stomach, where their daughter grew stronger each day. Through the windows, stars emerged one by one, cold and distant and beautiful. Tell me about her, Thyra said into the comfortable darkness. Our daughter. What do you think she'll be like? Wolf was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing absent patterns on Thera's hip. Strong, he finally said, like her mother, who survived a death sentence, and a river that should have killed her. Fierce, protective of those she loves. He paused. I hope she has your compassion too. The world needs more of that. And your strength, Thyra added. Your... She broke off as pain suddenly lanced through her skull. Thyra? Wolf sat up immediately, his hands moving to cup her face. What's wrong? The pain intensified, accompanied by flashes of images that weren't hers. Silver Creek territory, Elder Senna speaking with unfamiliar wolves, treaties signed in blood. Thyra gasped as the vision released her, leaving her shaking. I saw something, she managed. My old pack. They were meeting with other wolves. Planning something. Wolf's expression went cold and deadly. The bond, he said. As our mate connection strengthens, you're developing abilities. Some mates can sense threats to their partner. He pulled her close, his heart racing against her cheek. What exactly did you see? Elder Senna. She was with wolves I didn't recognize, but they felt wrong. Dangerous. Thyra clutched at Wolf's shirt, fear making her voice shake. And they were talking about the prophecy, about using it to unite the dissenting packs against you. Wolf's arms tightened around her, his body vibrating with barely suppressed fury. Drogath, he growled. He's allying with your former pack, using their fear and his ambition to build a coalition. What do? We prepare, Wolf said grimly, and we make sure that when they come for us, they regret it. The attack came 3 nights later. Thyra woke to the sound of breaking glass and wolf howls echoing through the castle corridors. Wolf was already moving, rolling from the bed with supernatural speed and grabbing weapons from the wall display, a vicious-looking short sword and a dagger that gleamed in the moonlight. Stay here, he commanded, his voice dropping to the alpha tone that demanded obedience. Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone except Mira or me. Wolf. He crossed to her in 2 strides and kissed her hard, desperate and claiming. Stay alive, he said against her lips. Whatever happens, protect our daughter. Then he was gone, and Thyra was alone with the sounds of battle growing closer. She locked the door with shaking hands and moved away from it, her mind racing. Wolf had told her to stay put, but every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to protect the life growing inside her. The fighting grew louder, snarls and screams and the wet sounds of claws tearing through flesh. Thyra pressed herself into the corner farthest from the door, her hands wrapped protectively around her stomach. Please, she prayed, please let him be okay. The door exploded inward. Thyra screamed as wood splinters showered the room. A massive brown wolf stood in the doorway, its muzzle stained with blood. Behind it, 2 more wolves prowled, one gray, one black. The brown wolf shifted, its form melting into something human. Thyra recognized him immediately, Marcus, from her old pack, the hunter who'd first discovered her pregnancy. Hello, Thyra, Marcus said, his smile predatory. The Alpha King isn't here to protect you now. Thyra backed toward the balcony, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. How did you get in? We have friends in low places, another familiar voice said. The gray wolf shifted into Kieran, the tracker who'd cornered her at the river. and a very interested ally who wants the prophecy child under his control, not wolves. The black wolf remained in animal form, blocking the only exit. Thyra glanced toward the balcony. 3 stories up. No escape that way without shifting, and she didn't know if her healing shoulder could handle the transformation. "You can't win," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Wolf will kill you all." "Maybe," Marcus acknowledged. "But by then, you'll be in Alpha Drogath's stronghold, and your child will belong to him." The prophecy didn't specify which Alpha would benefit from her power, after all. He lunged. Thyra tried to dodge, but she was still weak from her injuries, still slower than she should be. Marcus's hand closed around her throat, slamming her back against the stone wall hard enough to make her vision blur. His claws extended, pressing into her skin just shy of breaking it. "Nothing personal," Marcus said. "But you were always meant to die, Thyra. At least this way, your daughter might survive." A roar shook the entire tower. The doorframe shattered as Wolf crashed into the room in his wolf form, a massive black beast that dwarfed even the largest of Thera's attackers. He moved like death itself, all fang and fury, and Marcus barely had time to release Thera before Wolf's jaws closed around his throat. The snap of breaking bone echoed through the chamber. Kieran shifted and ran for the balcony, clearly planning to jump rather than face the Alpha King's wrath. He didn't make it. Wolf released Marcus's corpse and leaped, catching Kieran mid-stride and dragging him down. The sounds that followed were wet and brutal and mercifully brief. The Black Wolf tried to slip past while Wolf was occupied, but Garrett appeared in the doorway in human form, driving a silver blade through its ribs with professional efficiency. And then it was over. Wolf shifted back to human form, blood dripping from his mouth and hands, his eyes wild with barely controlled rage. He crossed to Thyra in 3 strides and pulled her against his chest, his whole body shaking. "You're alive," he said roughly, his hands moving over her frantically, checking for injuries. "Tell me you're alive." "I'm alive," Thyra managed, her voice hoarse from where Marcus had gripped her throat. "We're both alive." Wolf made a sound somewhere between a growl and a sob, burying his face in her hair. Around them, more guards poured into the room, but Thyra only had eyes for her mate, this powerful, terrifying male who'd just torn apart 3 wolves to save her. "This is my fault," Wolf said against her skin. "I should have posted more guards. Should have known they'd try for you directly. Should have—" "You saved me," Thyra interrupted, cupping his face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. "You came for me, and you saved us." Wolf's eyes were anguished. "I almost didn't. If I'd been 5 seconds slower, if they'd succeeded in taking you—" He pulled her close again, his arms bands of steel around her body. "I'm done playing nice. Done pretending there are lines I won't cross. Your former pack just declared war, and I'm going to finish it." "There were 3 attackers," Garrett reported from the doorway. "The rest of the castle is secure. They came in through the eastern tower window. 2 guards dead there." His expression was grim. "This was coordinated, sire. Planned. They knew exactly where to go." "Inside help," Wolf said flatly. "Find them. Anyone who aided this attack dies. I don't care if they're pack, court, or servants. Find them all and bring them to me." Garrett bowed and disappeared. Wolf turned his attention back to Thera, his bloody hands gentle as they moved to her stomach. "The baby?" "Still there," Thera said, placing her hands over his. "Still strong. Thank the gods." Wolf exhaled shakily. "Mira's on her way to examine you properly. You're moving to a different room, one without windows, with guards I personally trust posted inside and out." His expression hardened. "And tomorrow, I'm sending messages to every pack in my territory. Your former pack and Drogath have until the next full moon to surrender, or I'm bringing an army to their doorsteps." Thyra should have felt relief, or vindication, or any number of appropriate emotions. Instead, she felt only cold certainty. They won't surrender, she said quietly. Drogoth wants the prophecy child too much, and my old pack is too afraid of her. They'll fight. Then they'll die, Wolf said simply. Every single one of them, if that's what it takes to keep you and our daughter safe. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. I told you I wasn't a good male, Thera. I'm about to prove it. The things I'm going to do to protect my family, the wolf world will remember them for centuries. And standing there in his blood-soaked arms, surrounded by the corpses of wolves who'd tried to steal her away, Thyra realized something fundamental had shifted inside her. She wasn't afraid of Wolf's darkness anymore. She was grateful for it. Good, she whispered. Let them remember. Let them fear what happens when they threaten the Alpha King's mate. Wolf's smile was sharp as a blade's edge. There's my fierce she-wolf. He kissed her again, claiming and possessive, tasting of copper and rage. You're mine, Thera, my mate, my queen, the mother of my heir. And I will paint this world red before I let anyone take you from me. The northern territories burned. Wolf stood on a ridge overlooking the smoldering remains of the Shadowfang Pack's stronghold, his chest heaving with exertion he couldn't quite mask. Blood, most of it not his own, soaked through his torn shirt, and the wound in his side from the blood spell's lingering effects pulled with each breath. 3 days since Thyra had been taken. 3 days of pushing his weakened body past every reasonable limit. And still, it wasn't enough. Brother. Mira's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. She approached cautiously, her healer's bag conspicuously visible. You need to rest. The spell is still eating at you from the inside. If you keep pushing like this, then I die. Wolf's voice was flat, emotionless. He turned to face his sister, and she flinched at whatever she saw in his eyes. I die fighting to reach my mate, or I die sitting idle while she suffers. Those are my only 2 options, Mira. Choose which one you prefer. That's not... Mira cut herself off, her jaw working. Around them, Wolf's warriors were regrouping, tending to wounds and preparing to move again. They'd torn through 3 of Drogoth's allied packs in as many days, leaving devastation in their wake. Wolf, please, let me at least treat the wound properly. You're bleeding through the bandages again. Wolf looked down at his side, where crimson had indeed soaked through the makeshift dressing. The blood spell had created a wound that refused to heal properly, Drogoth's magic ensuring Wolf would be weakened during any rescue attempt. Smart, in a cowardly sort of way. Fine, he growled, but make it quick. Mira worked with practiced efficiency, peeling away blood-soaked fabric and applying fresh poultices that stung like fire. Wolf barely felt it. All his awareness was focused inward, on the mate bond that stretched between him and Thera like a golden thread. It pulsed weakly, strained by distance and whatever dark magic Drogoth was using, but it was there. She was alive. The Shadowfang Alpha talked before he died, Garrett reported, approaching with measured steps. Wolf's Beta looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes from days of forced marches and brutal fighting. Drogoth's stronghold is in the eastern mountains like we suspected, but the defenses are... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Extensive. Taking it by force with our current numbers would be suicide. Then we call in more favors. Wolf stood as Mira finished bandaging, ignoring her sound of protest. Send word to the Ironpaw Pack. Their alpha owes me for the border dispute I settled in his favor 20 years ago, and the Mistwalkers, their current alpha's mother, would be dead if I hadn't intervened during the succession challenge. Brother, even with their support, you're talking about a siege against a fortified mountain stronghold while you're actively dying from a blood curse. Mira's voice cracked. Please, 1 day of rest. Let me try to... No. The word came out as a command that made every wolf in earshot lower their heads in automatic submission. Wolf forced himself to soften his tone. Every hour I waste is another hour she's in Drogath's hands, another hour our daughter is at risk. He turned to Garrett. How long to gather the reinforcements? 2 days if we push hard. Then we push hard. Wolf's gaze swept over his assembled warriors, fewer than he'd started with, all bearing wounds from the rapid campaign. Anyone too injured to continue will return to the castle with Mira. The rest of you prepare to move. We march for the mountains within the hour. As his warriors dispersed to follow orders, Wolf closed his eyes and reached for the mate bond. During the day, when he was focused on battle and strategy, he could almost ignore the constant ache of Thyra's absence. But now, in this brief moment of stillness, it threatened to consume him. I'm coming, he thought, pushing the message through their connection with all the strength he could muster. Hold on, love. I'm coming for you. For a heartbeat, he thought he felt something. A flicker of response, warm and fierce and alive. Then it was gone, leaving only the hollow ache of separation. Wolf opened his eyes and started down the ridge. His body screamed in protest, the blood spell's poison making every movement an exercise in controlled agony. But pain was irrelevant. Rest was irrelevant. Everything was irrelevant except reaching Thera before Drogath could enact whatever twisted plan he'd concocted. That night, as they made camp in a defensible valley, Wolf finally allowed himself to sleep. Not because he wanted to, but because his body simply gave out. He collapsed onto his bedroll still fully armed, and dreams took him immediately. Thyra stood in darkness, her hand pressed against invisible bars. But she wasn't cowering. Her chin was lifted, her amber eyes blazing with determination that made Wolf's chest tight with pride and fear. I know you're coming, she said, and somehow he knew she was speaking directly to him through the bond. But I'm not going to wait helplessly. Our daughter deserves better than a mother who only knows how to run. Light bloomed around her, golden and ancient, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Power. The same power that had drawn him to her during the blood moon, now awakened and growing stronger. Come find me, Wolf, Thyra whispered. But know that when you arrive, you won't be rescuing a victim. You'll be joining your queen in battle. Wolf woke with a gasp, his hand instinctively moving to his side where the wound burned like molten metal. Dawn light filtered through the tent, and Garrett stood at the entrance with a grim expression. The reinforcements have arrived, his beta reported, and we've had a response from Drogath. Wolf sat up, ignoring the way his vision swam. Show me. The message was short and mocking, a piece of parchment with coordinates and a simple phrase. Come and take her, if you're strong enough. Wolf crumpled the paper in his fist, satisfaction cutting through his rage. He's overconfident, thinks the blood spell has weakened me enough that I'll fail. He stood, strapping on his weapons with methodical precision. Good. Let him think that. Confident enemies make mistakes. The combined force, Wolf's warriors plus the reinforcements from 2 allied packs, made an impressive sight as they assembled. Nearly 300 wolves, all battle-ready and loyal. Not enough to guarantee victory against a fortified stronghold, but enough to make Drogath bleed for every inch of ground. We move fast and hit hard, Wolf told his assembled alphas and commanders. Drogath expects a prolonged siege. We're going to give him an avalanche instead. He traced the route on the map with one clawed finger. The eastern approach has the heaviest defenses, so that's where we'll make our noise. But the real assault comes from the north, through the old mining tunnels. They're supposed to be collapsed, but our scouts confirmed there's still a passable route. That's a narrow passage, one of the allied alphas pointed out. Easy to defend if Drogath discovers it. Then we make sure all his attention is on the eastern gates. Wolf's smile was sharp and cold. I'll be leading that assault personally. Once inside, we converge on the Great Hall. That's where he'll have Thera. He'll want her visible, want to use her as leverage. His voice dropped to something deadly. He won't get the chance. They moved out as the sun reached its peak, traveling at a punishing pace that had the less conditioned wolves flagging within hours. Wolf felt each step like broken glass grinding into his bones, the blood spell's poison spreading deeper with every exertion. But he pushed harder, drew on reserves of strength he'd forgotten he possessed, and the warriors followed their alpha king into the mountains. The eastern peaks rose before them like jagged teeth against the sky, and somewhere within that stone labyrinth, Thyra waited. Hold on, Wolf thought again, sending the message through their bond. I'm almost there. The cell was cold and dark, lit only by a single torch that guttered in its bracket near the door. Thyra sat with her back against the stone wall, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, where their daughter continued to grow despite the terrible conditions. 4 other prisoners shared the space. Wolves from smaller packs who'd apparently displeased Drogath in various ways. You should eat, one of them said quietly. An older female with gray streaking her brown hair pushed a piece of stale bread toward Thyra. For the baby. Thyra forced herself to take it, though her stomach rebelled at the thought of food. She'd been here 3 days, and in that time, she'd learned several crucial things. First, Drogath was keeping her alive specifically because of the prophecy. He believed he could control her daughter's power if he raised the child himself. Second, the guards changed shifts twice daily, and one of them, a young male named Kale, showed subtle signs of discomfort with his alpha's methods. And third, something was changing inside her. The power had started as a flutter, barely noticeable, like a second heartbeat that wasn't quite in sync with her own. But it had grown steadily stronger, fed by her fear and rage and desperate maternal instinct. When she closed her eyes and reached for it, golden light bloomed behind her eyelids, ancient and fierce and utterly foreign. You feel it too, the older woman said, watching Thyra with knowing eyes. The awakening. It happened to my grandmother during her pregnancy, dormant bloodlines expressing when the body is under extreme stress. Thyra opened her eyes. What kind of bloodlines? The old ones, from before the pack split into territories, when we were all one nation under the first Alpha King. The woman's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The prophecy isn't about destruction, child. It's about reunification. Your daughter will have the power to remind all wolves what we once were, before fear and ambition divided us. Drogath thinks he can control that power. Drogath is a fool. The woman smiled grimly. And fools die bloody deaths when they meddle with forces beyond their understanding. The cell door clanged open, and Kale entered with the evening meal, thin soup, and more stale bread. His eyes flickered to Thyra, and she caught the brief flash of concern before he shuttered his expression. You, Kale said, pointing to Thyra. The Alpha wants to see you. Fear coiled in her stomach, but Thyra stood with as much dignity as she could muster. Kale led her through twisting stone corridors, past other cells filled with hollow-eyed prisoners, until they reached a chamber that must serve as Drogath's throne room. The Alpha himself lounged on an ornate chair, all swagger and cruelty. He was handsome in a brutal way, sharp features, cold blue eyes, muscles that spoke of constant training. But there was something rotten underneath, a wrongness that made Thyra's skin crawl. The Alpha King's whore, Drogath said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. I hope you're comfortable in your accommodations. What do you want? Thyra kept her voice steady, refusing to show fear. I want you to understand your situation. Drogath stood and circled her like a predator assessing prey. Your mate is coming for you. I'm counting on it, actually. My scouts report he's tearing through my allies with impressive brutality, despite the blood spell weakening him. Very romantic, very dramatic, but ultimately futile. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath. You see, I've set a trap. When Wolf arrives, And he will arrive, probably within the next day or two. He'll find you in the Great Hall, bound and helpless. He'll charge in like the hero he thinks he is, and my warriors will cut him down. The blood spell ensures he can't win in his weakened state. You underestimate him, Thyra said, though her heart raced with terror at the image Drogath painted. Perhaps, or perhaps you overestimate him. Drogath's smile was cruel. But it doesn't matter. Win or lose, Wolf will be eliminated and your daughter will be mine to raise. She'll unite the packs under my rule, and I'll become the most powerful alpha in history. He reached out and touched Thyra's stomach, his hand possessive and violating. Power exploded through her. Golden light burst from Thyra's skin, throwing Drogath backward across the chamber. He crashed into the wall with enough force to crack stone, shock written across his features. Thyra stared at her hands, watching ancient symbols glow beneath her skin before fading. What? Drogath struggled to his feet, rage replacing shock. How? The prophecy, Thyra said, understanding flooding through her. It's not just about my daughter. It's about me, too. About what carrying her has awakened. She felt the power thrumming through her veins, wild and dangerous and hers to command. You can't control this. You never could. Drogath's hand moved to the sword at his belt, but Kale cleared his throat from the doorway. Alpha, the scouts have returned. Wolf's forces have been spotted approaching from the east. For a moment, murder blazed in Drogath's eyes. Then he forced himself to calm, his strategic mind clearly working. Take her back to her cell, he ordered Kael. Double the guards. And if she tries that trick again, kill one of the other prisoners as punishment. As Kael led her away, Thyra's mind raced. Wolf was coming, walking into a trap, weakened and possibly dying. The bond between them pulsed with determination and pain, and she knew with absolute certainty that he would tear himself apart trying to reach her. She couldn't let that happen, couldn't let him face this threat alone while she cowered in a cell. Kyle, Thyra said quietly as they walked, I know you don't agree with what Drogath is doing. I can see it in your eyes every time you bring food. The guard's jaw tightened. It doesn't matter what I think. I'm bound to my alpha. Even when your alpha is leading you all to destruction? Thyra stopped, forcing Kael to face her. Wolf is going to tear through every warrior in this stronghold to reach me. You've heard the stories about the Alpha King. You know what he's capable of when properly motivated. She placed her hand over her stomach. And I'm about to give him more motivation than any wolf has ever had. What are you asking me to do? Help me free the other prisoners. Help me turn Drogath's trap into his own execution. Thyra met Kael's eyes steadily. When this is over, Wolf will remember who stood with his mate and who stood against her. Choose wisely. Kael was silent for a long moment. New conflict written across his young face. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. The shift change happens at midnight. Most of the guards will be pulled to the eastern defenses when Wolf attacks. That's your window. Thank you, Thyra whispered. Back in her cell, Thyra shared the plan with the other prisoners in hushed tones. The older woman nodded approvingly. Smart girl, but you'll need to learn to control that power before midnight, or you'll be as dangerous to your allies as to your enemies. So Thyra spent the remaining hours reaching for the golden light inside her, learning its rhythms and rules. It responded to emotion, to her fierce protectiveness, her rage at captivity, her desperate need to fight beside her mate instead of being rescued like a prize. Each time she called it forth, the light grew stronger, steadier. Your daughter is teaching you, the older woman observed. She knows her parents need to fight together, so she's sharing her future strength with you now. Thyra pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the flutter of movement that had begun recently. I'll keep us both safe, little one, she whispered. Your father is coming, and when he arrives, he's going to find his mate and daughter standing ready to fight beside him. The attack began at dusk. Wolf led the frontal assault personally, his sword singing through the air as he cut through Drogath's outer defenses with merciless efficiency. Blood sprayed across the stone, screams echoed off mountain walls, and the Alpha King moved through it all like death incarnate. The wound in his side had reopened, bleeding freely through his armor, but pain was just another sensation to be ignored. "Push forward!" he roared, his voice carrying over the chaos. "No mercy, no quarter!" His warriors surged behind him, crashing against Drogath's defenders like a tidal wave. The eastern gate shuddered under the assault, its ancient wood splintering. This was the distraction, the noise and fury that would draw every defender to this position. Meanwhile, Garrett led the real assault force through the northern mining tunnels, moving silent and deadly toward the Great Hall. Wolf felt the exact moment when the plan shifted from strategy to chaos. Through his bond with Thera, he sensed a surge of power, golden and fierce and utterly unexpected. She was moving, fighting, no longer contained in whatever cell Drogath had locked her in. "That's my fierce she-wolf," Wolf thought with savage pride. "Don't wait for me. Burn them all." The eastern gate finally gave way, and Wolf's forces poured into the stronghold's courtyard. Defenders rushed to meet them, and the battle devolved into close-quarters brutality. Wolf moved through it mechanically, each strike calculated for maximum efficiency. He was running on fumes now, his body held together by willpower and rage. But he was close. So close he could almost smell Thyra's honey and wildflower scent beneath the copper tang of blood. A horn sounded from inside the stronghold, 3 sharp blasts, the signal. Garrett had reached the Great Hall. Wolf disengaged from the courtyard battle and sprinted for the main entrance, his guards forming a protective wedge around him. They crashed through another set of doors, down a wide corridor lined with tapestries that caught fire from a dropped torch. Smoke filled the air, adding to the chaos. The Great Hall's doors stood open, and Wolf burst through them to find absolute pandemonium. Thera stood in the center of the hall, golden light blazing from her skin like a star given flesh. Around her, freed prisoners fought alongside Garrett's forces against Drogath's warriors. Bodies littered the floor, some moving, some still. And on the dais at the hall's far end, Drogath himself stood with murder in his eyes. "Wolf!" Thyra's voice cut through the noise, and their eyes met across the chaos. The mate bond, strained and suppressed for days, suddenly slammed back to full strength. Power exploded outward from both of them, golden light from Thyra meeting silver blue from Wolf, and where the two energies collided, something miraculous happened. The prophecy fulfilled itself. Ancient magic older than the packs themselves surged through the hall, forcing every wolf present to their knees in automatic submission. The fighting stopped. The screaming stopped. Even Drogath stumbled, his face twisted with shock and rage. Wolf crossed the hall in long strides, and Thyra met him halfway. When their hands touched, the power crystallized into something unbreakable, a bond that transcended mate connection and became something greater. Unity, purpose, the strength to reshape their world. "You came," Thyra said, her voice breaking. "Always," Wolf promised. He pulled her against his chest, breathing in her scent, feeling their daughter move between them. "I'll always come for you. Both of you." How touching. Drogath's voice dripped venom. He'd managed to regain his feet, though he swayed slightly. The Alpha King and his whore reunited. "But you're dying, Wolf. I can see it. That blood spell is eating you alive, and even your precious mate bond can't save you from—" Thyra moved. The golden light surged, and suddenly Drogath was airborne, flying backward to crash against the stone wall. Wolf felt Thyra's power flowing through their connection, wild and righteous and absolutely devastating. "You took me from my mate," Thyra said, advancing on Drogath with deadly purpose. "You threatened my daughter. You tortured innocence and called it strategy. The light around her intensified until it hurt to look at directly. The prophecy said my daughter would unite or destroy, but they forgot the most important part. I'm her mother, and I will destroy anyone who threatens my family. She raised her hand, and Drogath screamed as ancient magic tore through his defenses. But Wolf stepped forward, placing his hand on Thera's shoulder. Together, he said simply. Thyra looked at him, understanding blooming in her amber eyes. Their powers merged again, perfectly balanced. And when they struck, it wasn't just physical force or magical fury. It was judgment itself, delivered by the true rulers of all werewolves. Drogath died without dignity, his body crumbling to ash under the weight of combined power that had been building for centuries, waiting for the right mates to unleash it. When the light faded, absolute silence filled the great hall. Every wolf present, friend and former foe alike, stared at Wolf and Thera with expressions of awe and terror. The prophecy, someone whispered. Wolf pulled Thera close, his hand moving to her stomach where their daughter rested. The prophecy is fulfilled, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. My mate and I stand as Alpha King and Queen of all packs. Our daughter will be born into a united nation, not a fractured territory. And anyone who challenges this new order will face both of us. Through their bond, Wolf felt Thyra's agreement, her fierce determination matching his own. She turned in his arms, her hands moving to his wounded side. You're hurt, she said, golden light already flowing from her fingers into his injury. The blood spell's poison writhed and died under her touch, and Wolf felt strength returning for the first time in days. You healed me, he said wonderingly. We heal each other. Thyra smiled, tired but triumphant. That's what mates do. That's what partners do. She looked out at the assembled wolves. That's what we'll teach all packs. That unity makes us stronger than division ever could. Wolf kissed her then, claiming and grateful and achingly tender. When they finally broke apart, Garrett was grinning despite his wounds, and even the freed prisoners looked hopeful instead of broken. Secure the stronghold, Wolf ordered. Treat the wounded, all of them, regardless of which side they fought on. And send word to every pack in my territory. The prophecy child's parents have claimed their throne, and a new era begins today. As his warriors moved to follow orders, Wolf allowed himself to lean on Thera, exhaustion finally catching up. You are magnificent, he murmured into her hair, fierce and powerful, and everything I could have hoped for in a queen. You weren't so bad yourself, Thera said, though her voice shook slightly. Even dying, you came for us. I'll always come for you. Both of you. Wolf's hand joined hers on her stomach. Our daughter deserves parents who fight together, not a father who rescues from afar. You taught me that today. They stood together in the destroyed hall, surrounded by the aftermath of battle, and despite everything, Thyra felt something she'd feared she'd never experience again. Hope. Their daughter would be born into a world remade by her parents' combined strength. Born into unity instead of division, into love instead of fear. The prophecy hadn't been about destruction after all. It had been about this moment, when two broken wolves found each other and became something stronger than the sum of their parts. Together, they would reshape their world. And together, they were unstoppable.